Welcome. I'm Cassidy Cash, and this is That Shakespeare Life, the show where we go behind the curtain and into the real life and history of William Shakespeare to find out what it was like to live in turn of the 17th century England the way Shakespeare would have lived it. Today is the Iron Bowl here in Alabama, and stay with me, this does have a Shakespeare connection. If you're not from here, this not gonna sound like this really big thing. You're gonna be like, the iron what? But for us here in Alabama, this is a really big deal. Like, I'm headed out the door to go celebrate with my family because we're all going to watch the game together and have a lot of fun this afternoon. Now, it is a local rivalry among two teams in our state, Alabama and Auburn, and they are playing the game of football. Now, they're playing American football, and the winner doesn't really get anything in terms of like a trophy, or it's not even a significant bowl for the team itself in terms of their credit overall as a team in their Southeastern Conference. But for Alabamians, it is worth the bragging rights you get to have all year long to say that your team won the Iron Bowl. So it is on the brain today with football being in the air here in Alabama. So in celebration of the game today, I thought it would be fun to take a look at what football was like for Shakespeare's lifetime. Shakespeare actually uses the word football in his plays. He uses it twice, once in Comedy of Errors and then again in King Lear. And I've done a previous episode taking a look at the reference from King Lear that dives into some more history about that reference. So if you'd like to check that out, you can click the link that's on the screen somewhere. Or if you'd like to finish this episode, you can click the link below this episode when we're done and watch that one as a bonus episode. Now, of course, here in the US, we think of football as a game played with the traditional pigskin, and there's sports armor, and you've got your helmet and your pads, and you've got two teams running at each other on a 100-yard field. That's football here for us in the US. In Europe and many other places around the world, football is the word they use to describe soccer, and the game of soccer is called football everywhere except here in the US. And of course, soccer is played with much different teams, a different kind of ball, and a different kind of field, which brings me to the question of when we see the word football show up in Shakespeare's plays, or we're looking back through history and we say, oh, they played football in England way back when. What kind of game were they actually playing? Was it soccer, or was it more like American football? Well, to sort out exactly what football would have been for Shakespeare's lifetime, we sat down and we talked with Henry Hansen. Henry is a scientist that did some investigations on the 16th century football that was found at the castle of Mary, Queen of Scots. They actually think it belonged to Mary, Queen of Scots, and it is an actual football. As far as I know, it is the only surviving football from the 16th century that was uniquely preserved in this castle. And Henry explored this. And part of the interview we had with him, I asked him, what kind of game would Shakespeare have known as football? What did the game look like? Was it soccer? Was it football? And here's what he had to say. Soccer and football, obviously in Europe and in America, these are two very different games. From Shakespeare's lifetime, would the sport that he's referring to as football in his plays be more like European soccer or more like American football in terms of how it was played?
I think it would have been a good mix between the two. So I think the reference point that I have is in the middle of the 1800s, football and rugby kind of did a split when they started to make the rules, when the Football Association came into play. And so before that, it seems likely that there would have been kind of a combination of the hand-based rules and the foot-based rules. So somewhere in between, I guess. I've also heard it called a mob type of activity, a mob sport as well. So
yes, I've heard that mob football or even folk football, but basically some kind of combination of tons of people falling on the ball and trying to get it from one end to the other. So yes.
Yeah, by any means necessary, trying to move it.
So it turns out that Shakespeare would have reasonably been a fan of both American football and the European soccer. I like to think the whole move from England to the US that the Pilgrims and other settlers from England did when they founded this country had to do with how soccer melded into football, but exploring that trace of history is definitely for another episode. I just like to think that Shakespeare probably could have picked up American football as well as soccer because he probably played a blend of both during his lifetime. So There you go. If you would like to explore our full episode with Henry Hansen, where you can learn a whole lot more about that soccer ball, football that they found from the 16th century, and uncover exactly what Henry was able to discover through his scientific tests and hear the entire conversation with him, you can find that at CassidyCash.com/episode 283. You can also find this episode on, if you're following That Shakespeare Life on any of your favorite podcast platforms, this is out there and publicly available. So you can listen to that completely free. And it was a great episode. So you should go and check that out. Now, while you're there on CassidyCash.com/episode 283, if you'd like to see the visual elements that go along with our conversation about football, including a picture of the 16th century football, I think we've got some museum artifacts on there as well, along with some paintings and woodcuts and just some special extras related to 16th century football. If that's your jam, then you can log in as a patron of That Shakespeare Life or join us right there. The button is the same, whether you're joining or you're already using the button to log in, right there on the show notes. And all of that extra history will just expand right there on the show notes page. So make sure you check that out while you're listening if you want to get some of the more insider history elements to go along with your listening experience. That's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.